The night my restaurant almost closed for good, a food critic flew in from New York, sat at the worst table in my dining room, and told me my cooking tasted like a lie. Before I tell you what she said next and how the woman who came to bury my career ended up being the reason my daughter is still alive today, do me one small favor. If you believe that a good man can lose everything he built and still be handed something he never knew he needed, then hit that subscribe button right now, because this story is going to test that belief all the way to the last word. Stay with me. I promise you it earns the ending. My name is Marcus Bell. I'm 38 years old. I stand 6'2", and for most of my life people told me I could have done anything I wanted with a face and a pair of hands like mine. My grandmother used to take my palms and hold them up to the kitchen window, turning them in the light, and she'd say the sun passed through them like they belonged to a healer. She wanted me to be a doctor. My mother wanted me to be a preacher. I disappointed both of those good women and became a cook instead. Not a celebrity chef in a white coat on a television show. A cook. I built a small restaurant on a tired corner in a forgotten part of the city. I named it Odessa's, after my mother and I poured every single thing I had into it. The savings, the loans, the 18-hour days that turned into 20-hour days. All of it went into that little room with the brick wall and the open kitchen. And I did it alone, mostly because my wife had passed 3 years before this story begins. Her name was Renee. She died the way careful, quiet people sometimes do, from something nobody caught until it was too late to catch. 1 month she was tired, the next month she was gone, and I have never in my life felt so useless as I did standing in a hospital hallway being told there was nothing anyone could have done. She left me with a daughter named Ivy, who was 7 the year all of this happened and who inherited her mother's stubborn chin and her mother's careful habit of watching a room for a long time before she decided to trust anybody in it. Ivy and I lived in the 2 small rooms above the restaurant. Every single morning I made her breakfast on the same stove I used to cook for strangers, and every single night she fell asleep to the sound of pans and running water coming up through the floorboards. People asked me sometimes, usually with a little frown, whether that was any kind of life for a growing child. I told them the truth every time. My daughter was being raised inside the smell of good food and honest work, surrounded by people who showed up every day and did something real with their hands. There are a great many worse things for a child to be raised by than that. The trouble, as it always is, was money. There is always trouble with money when you love something that doesn't love you back quickly enough. Odessa's had good months and bad months, and by the spring of that year, the bad months had started stacking up like dirty dishes nobody had time to wash. I owed the bank. I owed my produce supplier and my meat supplier and the man who fixed my walk-in cooler when it died in February. And I owed a landlord named Mr. Petrakis, who had started leaving me voicemails that got shorter and colder every week until the last one was just 11 words long. Marcus, you know the number, you know the date, don't make me. I told myself I only needed one break, just one review in the right place, one night when the right person walked through my door and finally understood what I was trying to build in that little room. I used to lie awake upstairs listening to Ivy breathe in the next bed, praying for that one lucky night. I got it. I just didn't understand yet that the luckiest nights of your life almost always arrive wearing the face of a disaster. Her name was Claire Whitman, though I didn't learn that until later. What I knew when she walked in on a rainy Tuesday in April, 40 minutes before close, was that she didn't belong to my neighborhood, and she knew it. She wore a coat that cost more than my freezer, the kind of pale, expensive wool that doesn't come from anywhere near my part of town. She had skin like paper gray eyes that didn't blink enough, and hair the color of weak tea pulled back so tight it looked painful. She carried a slim leather notebook that she thought she was hiding under the edge of the table. She asked for a table for one, and my one waitress that night, a sweet college kid named Dominique, sat her at table 9, the wobbly one by the window, because it was the only 2 top left. Then the woman ordered 3 entrees. 3. Nobody eating alone orders 3 entrees unless they're being paid to. I watched her from the pass. If you don't know, the pass is the window between the kitchen and the dining room, and it's where a cook learns to read a room without ever leaving the heat. She ate the way critics eat, in small, deliberate forkfuls, tasting, instead of eating, writing something in that notebook between every bite, and never once, not for a single second, letting anything cross her face. Not pleasure, not disgust, nothing. Just that flat gray assessment, like a woman doing sums. When she finished, she asked to speak to whoever was cooking. Dominique came back into the kitchen looking like she'd seen a ghost. "Marcus," she whispered, "she says she's a critic from a magazine, a big one, like a really big one." I wiped my hands on my apron, and I went out to table 9 and up close. Claire Whitman looked at me the way you look at a math problem you've already decided must have an error in it somewhere. "You're the chef," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'm the cook," I said. "Marcus Bell." Mark, she wrote it down, of course. "Marcus, I'll be honest with you because I think you can take it. Your braised short rib is technically flawless. The greens are perfect. Your cornbread could genuinely win awards." She closed the notebook and folded her pale hands on top of it. And I did not believe a single bite of any of it. It tastes like a man cooking what he assumes people expect from a man like him. It tastes like a costume. It tastes, I'm sorry to say, like a lie. Now I have been called a great many things across 20 years of hot kitchens. I've been cussed out, walked out on, underpaid and undercut. But I've never once been called a liar over food I made with my own 2 hands. Food built brick by brick on my mother's recipes and my grandmother's recipes before hers. I felt something in the center of my chest go hard and cold like a door swinging shut. "You don't know one single thing about me," I said, and I kept my voice low because Ivy was asleep upstairs, and I never raised my voice in that restaurant. "I know you're playing it safe," she said, standing buttoning that beautiful coat one button at a time. "And I know that safe cooking is dead cooking. It just hasn't found out yet. My review runs in 3 weeks. If I were you, I would spend those 3 weeks figuring out whatever it is you're so busy hiding because as it stands, this place is going to close, and if I'm being truthful, it's going to deserve to." She set 2 $20 bills on the wobbly table, and she walked out into the rain without looking back. I stood in the middle of my empty dining room for what felt like an hour. Then I heard a small sound behind me, and I turned, and there was Ivy at the bottom of the stairs in her pajamas hair, in the 2 crooked braids I'd done badly that morning, clutching the gray stuffed rabbit her mother had given her before she died. "Daddy," she said in the smallest voice, "is the mean lady going to make us leave our house?" I crossed the room and I picked her up. She was getting far too big to be picked up all elbows and knees now, but I did it anyway because that night I needed to hold her more than she needed to be held. "Nobody is ever going to make us leave, baby," I told her. "I promise." And I lied to my own daughter with the same mouth that woman had just called a liar, because standing there in the dark, I did not have the first idea how I was going to keep that promise. The next 2 weeks were the hardest cooking of my entire life, and not because the work itself got harder. The work was the same. It was hard because I could not stop hearing her. "It tastes like a costume. It tastes like a lie." I stood at my stove at 2 in the morning after Ivy was asleep, and I finally made myself ask the question I'd been running from for 3 straight years. Was I cooking for the people who actually walked through my door? Or was I still, after all this time, cooking for the one person who couldn't? Because here's the thing I never told anybody. Renee used to sit at the end of my counter every evening before service and taste everything. She'd close her eyes, and she'd tell me the flat, honest truth. More salt, less thyme, this one's trying too hard, this one's perfect, leave it alone. She was my palate and my compass and my nerve. And after she died, I stopped changing the menu. Not for a week, not for 3 years. I froze that entire restaurant on the last night my wife was alive to taste it, the way a grieving man leaves a dead woman's coffee cup on the shelf unwashed, because washing it means she's really gone. Claire Whitman knew none of that. She'd never met my wife, never set foot in my life, never heard Renee's name. And in 20 minutes at a wobbly table, she had put her cold, precise finger on the exact center of the wound I'd been hiding from everyone, including myself. I hated her for it, and I could not stop thinking about her. She came back. That was the part I never saw coming. 9 days after that first rainy night, Claire Whitman walked into Odessa's again at the same late hour, sat down at the same wobbly table 9, and ordered nothing at all. "I'm not here to eat," she said before I could even ask. "I came to tell you the review is written. It runs Friday. It is not kind, Marcus, and I won't pretend it is." She paused, and for the first time since I'd met her, something moved behind those flat gray eyes. Something almost uncertain. "But I've been thinking about what you said to me. That I don't know anything about you. And the truth is, you were right. I don't. So I'm going to do something I have never once done in 15 years of this job. I'm giving you a chance to prove me wrong. One dish. Anything you want. If you cook me something true, something real, I will go back to my editor and I will kill the review and write a different one. You have my word, and my word is the only thing in this business I've never sold. I still don't fully understand why I said yes to a woman who had walked in to bury me. Maybe it was because my daughter was asleep upstairs, and I had already lost so much that losing my pride too didn't seem to cost anything. Or maybe it was because underneath all that expensive armor, Claire Whitman had looked for just 1 second as tired and as lonely as I felt every night of my life. I went back into my kitchen, and I did not reach for the short rib. I did not reach for the greens or the award-winning cornbread or any of the safe, dead, beautiful dishes I'd been hiding behind for 3 years. Instead, I made her the one thing my mother made for me on the afternoon of my father's funeral when I was 9 years old, and I could not stop crying, no matter how hard the aunts told me to be a man. A bowl of stewed tomatoes over white rice with a fried egg cracked on top and far too much black pepper. Poor food, sad food, funeral food, the food of a woman who had nothing left in the house and nothing left in her heart to give her grieving son except something warm. I carried that bowl out to table 9 and I set it down in front of the most powerful critic in the country without a single word of explanation. She looked down at it. Then she looked up at me almost annoyed, like she thought it was some kind of trick. Then she picked up the spoon and she took one bite, and Claire Whitman's eyes filled up so fast and so completely that she had to press her napkin hard against her mouth to keep from making a sound. "What is this?" she said, and it wasn't a question. It was almost a plea. "That's my mother," I told her. "That's the truest thing I know how to cook. There's no restaurant in the world that would ever put it on a menu. But you asked me for the truth, so there it is in a bowl." She ate the whole thing in silence, crying the entire time, not even trying to hide it anymore, this composed and terrifying woman coming apart over $4 worth of rice and tomatoes. When she finally set the spoon down, she did it very carefully, like it might break. "My mother used to make something like this," she said, staring at the empty bowl. "Not the same, but like it. Tomatoes and bread on the bad days when the money was thin. She died when I was 11 years old, and after she died, my father sent me away to schools that taught me which fork to use and how to hold a wine glass, and above everything else, how to never, ever cry where another human being could see me do it." She let out a broken little laugh. "I've spent 15 years of my life sitting at tables like this one, telling other people that their food is a lie. And the whole time, Marcus, I have been the biggest lie in the room. Because I stopped tasting anything real the day they buried my mother. I chose food that couldn't reach me on purpose. It's safer that way. You can't miss what never gets in." And that was the night I stopped seeing the coat and started seeing the woman. She didn't run the review. She killed it. She told her editor the place wasn't worth the column space, which was its own strange kind of mercy, and then that Sunday, when the restaurant was dark and closed, she came back and knocked on the front glass. Ivy got to the door before I could stop her and stood there with her hands planted on her hips. "You're the mean lady," my daughter announced through the glass. Claire crouched all the way down to Ivy's level, right there on the wet sidewalk, which is something almost no adult ever thinks to do. She said, completely serious. "You're right. I was the mean lady, and I'm very sorry about that. Your dad taught me that I was wrong, and it's not easy for me to admit when I'm wrong, so it took me a few days. Do you think you could let me try again?" Ivy studied her through the glass for a long, long moment, with those careful, watching eyes she got from her mother. Then she said, "Do you know how to make cookies?" "I'm terrible at cookies," Claire admitted. "Okay." Ivy decided, unlocking the door herself. "Then Daddy can teach you and I will supervise." That is how it actually started. Not with a date or flowers or a phone number scribbled on a receipt. It started with a 7-year-old girl appointing herself the official supervisor of a baking lesson. Claire came the next Sunday and the Sunday after that. And she was in fact genuinely, spectacularly terrible at cookies, which Ivy found to be the single funniest thing that had ever happened in the history of the world. And somewhere in the flour and the burnt first batch, and my daughter laughing so hard she got the hiccups. I found myself laughing too out loud in my own kitchen for the first time in 3 years. Claire started staying later. She'd help me test new dishes, the real ones, now the brave and frightening ones. I'd been too scared to cook while Renee's ghost was still grating me. Claire had a palate like a surgeon's scalpel, and once she finally turned that blade toward helping instead of wounding, my food started to wake up. Dishes I'd buried came back to life. I put my grandmother's oxtails on the menu. I put my father's hot water cornbread on the menu. I put the funeral rice on the menu just once a week on Sundays and called it Mother's Rice. And people who had never met my mother started crying into it the same way Claire had. Word got around slowly the way real word always does. Not a viral post, not a stunt, just one honest plate at a time. Claire never wrote about Odessa's again, wouldn't said it wouldn't be right now that she knew us, but she knew every food writer in the country, and quietly, without ever putting it in print, she started sending them. Not to be seen, to eat. And the bad months finally stopped stacking up. One Friday in June, I called Mr. Petrakis and paid him every dollar I owed him in full, and then I hung up before he could say a word, and I walked out into the alley behind my own restaurant, and I cried the same way Claire had cried over that bowl of rice. But I have to tell you the hardest part now, because a happy ending you didn't have to earn isn't worth the breath it takes to tell it. This is the part where I very nearly lost everything for real, and where the woman who came to end me became the reason my whole world didn't end. It was July, and hot in the way this city gets hot, thick, and mean. Ivy had been tired for about a week. Not ordinary kid tired, something deeper. She'd come home from her summer day camp and lie down on the banquette in the dining room in the middle of the afternoon and just sleep, and she'd gone pale in a way that woke up the animal part of me that still remembered exactly how Renee looked pale before the end. I told myself it was the heat. I told myself it was a growth spurt. I told myself every comfortable lie a scared, broke father tells himself, so he doesn't have to face a hospital bill he can't pay. Claire didn't tell herself anything. She came in on a Wednesday afternoon, took one look at my daughter asleep in gray on the banquette at 3 in the afternoon, crossed the room, put her hand on Ivy's forehead, and then she stood up and said 4 words in a voice I had never heard her use before. "We're going. Right now." I fought her. God help me, I fought her. I said I couldn't afford the emergency room. I said we'd go to the clinic on Monday when it was cheaper. I said it was probably nothing. Probably the heat, probably a bug going around the camp. And Claire Whitman, who 15 weeks earlier had sat at my worst table and called me a liar to my face, grabbed my face in both of her hands the way you grab someone to make sure they hear you. And she said, "Marcus, I watched my mother die because my father decided it was probably nothing. I decided a long time ago that I would never again stand in a room and watch someone I love die of a decision. So I am telling you, I will carry Ivy to the car myself if I have to, but do not fight me on this one. Someone I love." She said it without even noticing she'd said it, and I stopped fighting and we went. It was not nothing. Ivy had a kidney infection that had turned quiet and deep and dangerous, the kind that stops screaming and goes silent right before it does real permanent damage. The doctor in the hard white light of the emergency room told me plainly the way the good ones do that, another 2 or 3 days at home, and we would have been having an entirely different conversation, one about her kidneys. Maybe about more than that. He looked me right in the eye, and he said, "Whoever brought her in today, you need to thank them, today, tomorrow, and for the rest of your life, because they may have just saved this little girl's kidneys, and possibly a great deal more than that." I turned to thank Claire, and she was already gone from the room. I found her out in the hallway with her back pressed flat against the wall, sliding slowly down it until she was sitting on the cold floor with her knees pulled up, sobbing into them, coming completely apart. Because a woman who had spent her entire adult life refusing to cry where anyone could see her had just been handed the one single thing that no amount of armor and no expensive school and no perfect posture could ever protect her from. A child she had come to love almost too late, caught just barely in time. I sat down on that hospital floor next to Claire Whitman in my kitchen apron that still smelled like onions, and I put my arm around her, and neither one of us said anything at all for a very long time. We didn't need to. Ivy was going to be okay. That was the entire world right there in 7 words, and both of us were finally standing inside it together. Ivy stayed in the hospital for 4 days, and Claire never once left. She slept folded up in the vinyl visitor's chair. She learned every nurse's name and every nurse's kid's name. She brought Ivy the terrible lopsided cookies she'd finally almost learned how to make, and on the 3rd night when Ivy was awake and cranky and bored and feeling well enough to be a handful again, my daughter looked over at the woman curled up in the chair and asked the question I think she'd been holding the whole time. "Claire, are you going to be my other mom now?" The whole room went quiet. The monitor beeped. I opened my mouth to rescue Claire from having to answer a 7-year-old's impossible question. She didn't need rescuing. Claire got up out of that chair and she came and sat on the edge of the bed, and she took both of Ivy's small hands into both of hers and she said, "Ivy, I want you to listen to me because I'm going to tell you the truth. And the truth is important in your family. I've learned that. I would like to be your other mom more than I have ever wanted anything in my whole life. But that is a very, very big job, the biggest one there is, and I want to do it exactly right. So here's what I can promise you today. I'm going to be here every single day for as long as you'll have me, and you and me and your dad will figure out what you want to call me whenever you're ready and not 1 minute before. Is that a deal?" Ivy considered this with the enormous solemn seriousness of a very small judge weighing a very large case. Then she stuck out her hand. "Deal," she said, "but you have to get better at cookies. Those ones are still bad." "That, May," said Claire, shaking my daughter's hand, "is completely fair." We were married 11 months later in the dining room of Odessa's on a Sunday when the restaurant was closed to everyone but the people who mattered. There were maybe 40 of them. Dominique, the college waitress, cried so hard through the vows that she had to sit down. Ivy was the flower girl, and she took the job so seriously that she practiced walking down the aisle for 2 solid weeks and refused all suggestions to speed it up. I cooked my own wedding, of course I did. I made stewed tomatoes over white rice with a fried egg and too much black pepper, 40 bowls of it. And I stood at the pass and watched a room full of people who loved us eat my mother and my grandmother and my father and everyone else who had carried me to that day. And I watched Claire eat it too at the head of the table in a simple white dress, crying the exact same way she'd cried the very first time. Except now I got to walk out from behind my kitchen and cross the room and wipe the tears off her face with my own thumb in front of everybody. Odessa's is still there. It's doing better now than I ever let myself dream about on those 2 in the morning nights when I thought I was going to lose it all. There's a wait for a table on the weekends, which still makes me laugh every time. Claire quit the magazine for good. She said she was finished spending her life telling strangers their food was a lie. She wanted to spend the rest of it helping one stubborn man tell the truth, 1 plate at a time. She runs the front of the house now, and she is remarkably genuinely good at it, and she is also to this very day absolutely terrible at cookies, and Ivy will tell you so herself loudly whenever anyone asks. Ivy is 11 now, and healthy and tall and mouthy, and she has 2 working kidneys and her mother's watching eyes and her father's stubborn heart. She started calling Claire Mom 3 years ago on an ordinary Tuesday with no ceremony at all. Just looked up from her homework and said, "Mom, can you check this?" And Claire had to leave the room for a minute, and none of us ever made a thing out of it because that's how the biggest things happen in our family. Quietly, at the counter, over food. Sometimes late at night after we lock the door and flip the chairs up onto the tables, the 3 of us sit at table 9, the wobbly one, which I have never once fixed and never will, because it is the exact table where every good thing in my life began. And I think about how the worst review of my career turned out to be the best thing that ever walked through my door. I think about how close I came to losing my restaurant, and how much closer I came to losing my little girl, and how a woman who arrived in an expensive coat to tell me my whole life was a lie ended up being the one who stayed long enough to make me an honest man. My grandmother held my hands up to the kitchen window once when I was small and told me the light passed through them like they belonged to a healer. She was wrong about the job. I never did become a doctor, but she was not wrong about the hands. It just turned out that the person those hands were meant to heal was going to walk into my restaurant in an expensive coat on a rainy Tuesday in April. 40 minutes before close and call everything, I was a lie so that I could finally at long last learn how to tell the truth. If you made it all the way here with me, then you already understand that this was never really a story about food. It was a story about the walls we build around ourselves after we lose the person who used to be able to reach us, and about how much courage it takes for the next person to knock, and how much more it takes for us to open the door. So here's what I want you to do before you go. If there is someone in your life who once told you the truth when a comfortable lie would have been so much easier and it changed you, put their name down in the comments. Just their name. Say it out loud into the quiet. Let them exist for 1 second in a place they will never see. And if this story reached you, if it got past the wall even a little, then subscribe and stay with me because I've got more of these. True ones, hard ones, stories that end in kitchens and hospital hallways and dining rooms full of people who almost didn't make it and did. The next one begins the exact same way all the good ones do, with a good man standing alone in the dark, certain that he has already lost everything that matters, because that it turns out is always the moment right before everything changes.